good evening, Adam Boulton. You rushed in at the beginning of the show because Gambling Gate, Betgate, however you want to term it, has become bigger this evening, cross-party, but also could potentially involve a cabinet minister as well.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, what we had today was obviously the suggestion that the original investigation into the betting close to the announcement of the election date had been expanded into the police. What we had this afternoon was the news that Kevin Craig, a candidate in Suffolk for the Labour Party, admitted that he had placed a bet some time ago on the date of the election, and he was immediately suspended from the party. He has publicly apologised. He was actually quite a big fish in the Labour Party, Kevin Craig. He founded a very successful lobbying firm known as PLMR, Political Lobbying and Media Relations. And he was even voted the Public Affairs Consultant of the Year in 2011. So, a mature...
So he's heavily involved in Labour.
Yeah, a mature man who perhaps, should have known better. And indeed, he had donated £100,000 to the Labour Party for this campaign, which the party has now returned. So that is all quite embarrassing.
Yeah.
But then, hours after that, first reported on the BBC, was that Alistair Jack, who's actually in the cabinet, a Scottish secretary, has now admitted that he placed a bet. In the case of Kevin Craig, he was actually betting on against himself. He was betting that he was going to lose in his constituency.
Which is an odd thing to do, by the way.
Well, I've known politicians in the past say, well, at least it's a consolation. I'll have a few quid if I lose.
Okay, fair enough.
I have heard politicians say that. And he, as I say, was followed by Alistair Jack, who is the Scottish secretary. He says he actually made over £2,000 on a variety of bets on the election date. He bet it would be in June and July. But, and this is the crucial part, he says he didn't bet close to the announcement. He bet back in before the month of May. The announcement was made on May the 22nd.
Okay.
So when presumably the decision hadn't been made. But it's quite interesting, Kate, because I've just been looking at their seats, which I'm not going to name, so we don't have to read out all the other candidates. But in the South Scottish seat, which Alistair Jack represents, that is neck and neck. That is a marginal with the SNP. And then in this seat in central Suffolk, or near Suffolk, where the Labour, Kevin Craig, was standing, that is generally seen as a safe Labour seat, a safe Conservative seat, But according to the latest MRP polling, again, it's neck and neck. This time Labour challenging the Conservatives. So we've got the SNP challenging the Conservatives in Dumfries, and again, definitely neck and neck. And then we've also got, according to the polls, another neck and neck constituency. So the question arises is what will be the impact, certainly in central Suffolk, of Labour effectively abandoning their candidate? Does that mean that one of their hopeful targets has now gone out the window?
And of course, earlier today, Rishi Sunak distanced himself, publicly disowned, I suppose, the two Conservative Party candidates. So they're down. Well, they're not down two candidates. They are still candidates. They will still appear on the ballot paper as such.
These are the ones who are in deep trouble because it does appear that their bets were cast very close to the announcement of the election.
Yeah, they are a little bit different. So there are differences here to mention. The two Conservative candidates in that respect placed a bet allegedly on the date of the election, and the allegation is that they had prior knowledge of that. The Labour candidate bet against himself, and Alistair Jack saying here today that he did place bets on both June and July election dates, but he did not do those in May. In other words, he did them without any prior knowledge, certainly during the month of May.
I mean, I've got to say, Kate, this is one area where football has actually showed the politicians how to behave, because the rules of the FA are quite clear. If you're involved in football at any level, you should not bet on anything that you could possibly be tangentially involved with.
Yeah.
And, I suspect a lot of people will be asking themselves why politicians can't have the same sort of rules.
And also why, some of these are experienced people, why they didn't think that there would be a problem, betting against themselves, betting on themselves to lose, getting information, if that is the case, on the date of the election, how sort of far that information spread, we don't know yet.
Well, I think the
But
answer
why would someone think that
because
that's
they're
okay?
gamblers, because they
Are they gamblers though?
they bet on politics, and they're repeat offenders, and they shouldn't do it. I mean, Ian Duncan
Is
Smith
this a widespread thing? I mean, I mean, you will have spoken to 10 times the number of politicians I have in your career. Do they often place bets?
Well,
Political bets?
it is known that I would say a substantial minority of politicians are people who bet. I mean, they're very often people who are also interested in the turf or whatever. But I mean, we have to remember one thing about politicians is a lot of people think that they are grey individuals, boring individuals, but actually they're all gamblers with their own careers, because they put
Metaphorical gamblers.
well, literal gamblers, because their whole political future is gambled on, first of all, them being elected, and then secondly, their party winning elections and being in power. And so actually the temperament is there to be a gambler anyway, I would say, amongst politicians. They're not like, people, boring journalists or doctors or accountants or other professionals who kind of work their way up, and if they do a good job they can expect promotion. It's not like that in politics, because every 3, 4, 5 years you throw the whole thing up in the air.
The question then arises, Adam, does scandal like this cut through? And More in Common has carried out some polling to this point, looked at polling on campaign scandals, missteps or gaffes that members of the public are most aware of and take most seriously. Two stand out on the gaffometer. This gambling scandal that we've been discussing, and that could permeate through even more, of course, after the extra bits of news that we're getting through this evening, and Rishi Sunak leaving D-Day early. Let's speak to More in Common Executive Director Luke Trill, who joins us now just to explain a bit more on this. Evening, Luke.
Good evening.
So give us some examples here of gaffes and whether they have or have not cut through with the public when it comes to deciding where they might place their vote.
Yeah, so what we wanted to look at was firstly which gaffes or scandals or missteps on the campaign trail people had heard about, and then what their impact was on what people were thinking. So particularly whether they reflected badly on the party involved. So we tested a range of different missteps, including how Keir Starmer handled Diane Abbott's candidacy, and that was actually, for him, the worst of the Labour missteps, the one that most people had heard about and thought reflected badly. But we also tested when he was laughed at during that debate for mentioning his dad was a toolmaker. Again, Emily Thornberry's comments about larger class sizes maybe being needed because of their private schools policy. All of them were a bit lower down the scale. And we also tested some of those conservative scandals and missteps. And what was really interesting was, as you say, there were just two that really stood out. They had had high cut through. Almost everyone had heard about them, and almost everyone felt they reflected badly on the Conservative Party. And that was this Gamblegate scandal, as it's become known, and Rishi Sunak's decision to leave the D-Day celebrations early. And in fact, in number 3, of them in terms of cut through and reflecting badly was the comments that Rishi Sunak made about not having Sky TV as a child as something that he'd had to do without. And it's funny, it's something that we hear in focus groups all the time. It's really cut through that Sky TV comment. Good news there for Ed Davey. Very few people think that he falling off a paddleboard reflected badly on the Liberal Democrats.
I mean, it's interesting because actually, as far as public awareness, looking at your chart, it's actually the top 5 are all held by the Tories, aren't they? Including being rained on when he made the election announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's sort of, it was really interesting. We did a word cloud the day the general election was announced, and we asked people in one word to describe Keir's speech and in one word to describe Rishi Sunak's speech, and the word in the middle of Rishi Sunak's word cloud was wet. And of course, part of the reason that cut through was because it was just such powerful imagery for people. And I do, you do have to, I think, slightly feel for the Conservatives that because there's this sense that they're struggling in the campaign, every misstep almost cuts through a little bit more with people because it reinforces what they're already thinking. And I think this Gamblegate one in particular has cut through and is damaging because it reinforces that sense of, one rule for them, another rule for us, builds on, what happened during Partygate as well. So I think they are suffering from that. But again, if there's one bit of good news from the Conservatives, we also asked about the sheep that ran away from Rishi Sunak. And the good news is not many people had heard about that, nor did they think it reflected too badly on him.